what makes a book or a screenplay a horror? Like, how is it different than like a mystery or a thriller or fantasy that can have like scary elements, but what makes a horror a horror?
Yeah, and I'm going to tackle this just from my own opinion as opposed to some scientific kind of thing or some academic kind of debate kind of thing. I'm just going to tell you for me what makes horror horror. Um, and I thought a lot about this because it's been, especially in the movie world, it's been debated ever since like Get Out came out.
Mhm.
There's this term called elevated horror in the movie world, and elevated horror just simply meant like horror with a deeper message or horror with a kind of a prestige horror. Maybe it has better actors. Maybe it has themes beyond just like teenagers get killed if they have sex or something like that. It has this bigger kind of message. Um,
Mhm.
so that became a debate. Like Get Out's not horror; it's too good to be horror.
Mhm.
Sinners isn't horror; it's too good to be horror. We can't call it a horror movie. Um, so, I sat back and thought, what is a horror movie? Because to me, something like Underworld, the vampire action movie, that's not a horror movie. Blade isn't a horror movie.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
they're action movies.
Mhm.
Hotel Transylvania isn't a horror movie. They have horror elements. They have monsters and things, but they're not horror movies. So ultimately, what I came down to, and I have friends that say if it's intended to scare you, it's horror. And I'm
Mhm.
like, maybe. And then there's thrillers that kind of mess with you a little bit too, because they're intended to make you tense and worried. Um, but what I ultimately came down to, and we'll talk a little bit about the monster in the house genre in a bit, the Save the Cat monster in the house genre, is that most of the horror I watch have all the elements of the monster in the house genre. So I'm going to skip ahead. I'll just say it here really quick. So Save the Cat has these things called genres, and
Mhm.
being Jessica Brody fans here, most of you probably know.
Yep.
Um, Save the Cat has 10 story patterns or genres. And the way they're used in Save the Cat, they're patterns. They're they're almost like they're not templates, but they're trajectories of story or something similar that you could almost codify. Oh, it's that type of story. It's a buddy love story. What's a buddy love story? It's a story where it's more about a relationship, whether it's love or friendship. It's a golden fleece story where it's a story about someone going on a road trip or a quest to get a prize. There's some trophy or prize or treasure at the end. And those could be heist movies or books. Those can be sports movies commonly, or something like Little Miss Sunshine or something where people go on a road trip to get a quest. And there's 10 of these, but the one that I'm of course most focused in is called the monster in the house genre. And what I the way I categorize horror personally, um, and this is almost as a writer, but also as a fan, I've thought about is monster horror movies always devolve into monster in the house stories. And monster in the house stories have three elements. There's a monster, and the monster can be human, it can be a disease, it can be all these different things. But if it is human, I think there's a level of inhumanness and it's evil or intent. There's something about that person that almost becomes inhuman by just how, maybe obsessed they are with something or how evil they are or something. There's something inhuman about them. So there's a monster, there's a house. And what I categorize most important about the house is how does it trap you? How is the hero trapped somehow with the monster? That's the key thing to the house. And last but not least, there's a sin. And the sin is it's an element that brings about the monster, it lets the monster thrive or something like that. Maybe we'll talk more about those in a second, but just putting those in place. I think all horror movies ultimately become a monster in the house movie. And what that means is they become a movie that becomes a battle for survival where a monster is with the hero and the hero is trapped in the house and the sin has brought about the monster. And at some point in the movie or book or story you're writing, the graphic novel, that occurs usually by the end. And sometimes it doesn't happen till act three in a horror movie, like the slow burn ones. And sometimes it happens at the midpoint, and sometimes it happens right from page one of your horror novel or story.
And that is kind of a nice like broken down like definitive answer in a way of like what a horror is. So I do like that. And I heard some things of like a horror is when something unexpected kind of like turns your character something that someone doesn't know turns the character's world upside down. So it's like we might know about murderers, but a murderer is probably going to be like more of a thriller unless the murderer is something that's you don't that's mysterious. That's sort of like a Michael Myers thing, like, well, who is this and why is he doing this? Then it's sort of a horror. So there's lots of different kind of like definitions out there.
But
So it's
and
interesting.
I'll be honest, the thriller horror differentiation for me, that almost everything I say today or in my book, you could apply to a thriller, a certain type of thriller. That the hand that rocks the cradle. I saw that on Hulu the other night. They did a reboot of that or something. Fatal Attraction.
Hmm.
Those those movies could be horror movies. Like I watched Megan, and Megan is kind of like Fatal Attraction or Hand That Rocks a Cradle. It's kind of like urban horror, but it has an AI kid robot in it. And
Yeah.
whether that's a horror movie or a thriller or anything, I don't care too much. I know it's important, like when you're selling your book, for example, as a genre, and there's certain elements that you'll kind of know, like does it slot in as a slasher versus, maybe you fall into subgenres in that world. Um,
Mhm.
but but I don't know, from my perspective, thrillers and horrors are so closely adjacent uh, that it doesn't matter too much, whether
Yeah.
whichever one you're writing. Yeah.
Yeah, semantics kind of sometimes.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this video, we've got a lot more on writingmastery.com. Check the description for links to our blog, free writing tools, and more. Happy writing.